Go.
Great.
Okay. All right, we're now recording. So I am curious about what you think viewers should know about They Ain't Ready for Me. What should drive us to go check it out?
So if you have never heard about this film, what I would say is the film is about Tamar Manasa, who is an African-American rabbinical student who is leading the fight against gun violence on the south side of Chicago.
All right, all right. How did you find out about Tamar Manasa and what she was doing there? Why did you want to tell this story?
So in October of 2016, I read an article online about her, and the headline of the article was Black Rabbinical Student Leads Fight Against Gun Violence in Chicago. And I was intrigued just by the headline, so I dove into this interview with her, an article, and I was blown away. I read it and I could feel her personality jumping out from the article at me. And immediately I said, I need to talk to this woman and I need to ask her if she will let me make a film about her.
Wow.
And that is essentially what happened. I reached out to her via her organization's website and on social media, and it took her a little while to respond to me. And when she finally wrote me back, she said, I think my life is about as interesting as watching the paint dry. So I don't know why anybody would want to do a film about me.
Really?
Yeah. It took a little bit of persuading. It took a while. It took a few months. We had a phone call and we must have talked for like an hour. And I got off the phone and I said to my wife, she is more awesome than I originally thought.
Wow.
And then a couple of months later, I got a direct message on Facebook from Tamar, and she said, I'm in Staten Island. If you want to come and see me, we can talk. So I live in Manhattan. Staten Island is part of New York City, but it's far. So I texted her back immediately and I said, give me 2 hours and I'll be there. Mm-hmm. And I dropped what I was doing and I went out to Staten Island and I met her and we sat down and had a really long conversation. And at the end, she said, yeah, if you want to make this film about me, go ahead.
Wow. Wow.
And that was it. That was all I needed.
Yeah. So Tamar created an organization called Mothers and Men Against Senseless Killings, or MASK is the acronym. And a large chunk of the film chronicles Tamar and her volunteers holding down the street corner of Stewart Ave and 75th Street in Chicago. Talk about what you observed them doing there on a daily basis.
Yeah. Yeah. So Tamar goes out to the corner of 75th and Stewart every day in the summer, from the first day of school vacation until the last day of school vacation. She is out there from 4 to 8 every afternoon, and they are making food and having a good time, playing games and music. So when she goes out there, essentially her day is pretty routine. She takes from her house whatever she needs for the day. She packs it all into the car. She goes to the block, unloads the car, unloads the other things that they'll need for the day. She keeps a lot of food and other, non-perishables in a neighbor's house close by. Mm. So she sets up, she throws her chair down on the corner and she sits down and waits for the world to come to her. And every day the world comes to Tamar.
Yes. How frequently were you filming on that corner, or elaborate, or how elaborate was the equipment footprint that was needed? What were some of the challenges of gathering and editing that footage?
So I went back and forth from New York to Chicago every few weeks while I was filming. Mm. And I would stay out there for a few days at a time. The footprint that we had in terms of production was very minimal. it was me and a camera operator. And the camera operator also did their own sound. So I didn't want, and I couldn't afford a large crew. But in addition to the money aspect, I wanted to be as unobtrusive as possible. My job, as I see it, is to document Tamar's reality, not to insert myself into Tamar's reality and change it. So it's sort of, they call it fly on the wall. And that's what I want to be. I want to blend into the background. So when you have one camera and one director, it's easier to do that than if you have a larger crew. So essentially the way that I wanted to make this film is to allow the events to unfold in front of me and not to direct events, because that wouldn't be true to what was happening on the block and what continues to happen on the block. So that's really what we did. And I'm actually, you can see me a couple of times in the film, because once you go out to the block, you can't just sit there and not do anything while there's so much work that needs to be done. So sometimes you'll see me like hauling garbage away or manning the grill or, just doing things, because when you see a need, you do it. That's how it works out there. Like everybody is pitching in, including me. And, the cameraman also, we have two great camera people. The primary one, his name is Dan Coleman. And when Dan wasn't available, we worked with a woman named Tabby Kohler. And they both understood the dynamics of the situation very quickly. And they worked within the sort of loose framework that I gave them. And it gave them a lot of autonomy to sort of wander around the block. Of course, I would be pointing out things that I thought were interesting. Anytime I see a group of kids playing together, I immediately want the camera, on the kids, because there's just such innocence there and joy. And also just random things that you see, like, oh, check out that drunk dude stumbling across the block. Just like throw the camera on that and be unobtrusive, but document it.
Yeah.
And of course, Tamar is the center of this universe. So she had a microphone on her the whole time. And she was the central focus of what our filming was.
Wow. And she is a diminutive person and seems really humble and down to earth. So it was fascinating to definitely watch her with this world evolving and revolving around her leadership. That was so powerful.
Yeah, thank you. She is diminutive, but she is a force of nature.
I got that impression.
I mean, she is immediately, whatever room she walks into, all eyes go on her. Mm-hmm. She's charismatic. There aren't enough words to describe, her personality. She's magnetic. Mm-hmm. And, she gets a lot of attention, a lot of media attention. She got attention from me, for example. I reached out to her, but she doesn't seek it out. She didn't come to me and say, make a film about me. I had to drag her into this process to make a film about her. And what I observed is that's essentially how things go. So people hear about her and they go out there. They seek her out. I've never seen her seek out a solicitation for money, for things. People just give to her because she is magnetic.
Yes. Yes, so amazing. So another interesting aspect of the film is its exploration of Tamar's religious faith. Did you know about that part of her life before filming started? It sounds like that may have been the headline that captured you.
Yeah, that was the headline. And of course, to me, that was very compelling, as somebody who is an Ashkenazic Jewish person in New York City. I don't, in my circle, see a lot of Jews of color. But of course, I know that there are Jews of color. But what was interesting about this article was that Tamar said that it's her Judaism that has led her to be an activist. That is what she's learned as a Jew that has shown her that she has to do something.
Mm-hmm.
And that was probably what really compelled me to make this film, is to just to further explore that aspect of her personality. You can't understand Tamar Manasa without understanding Tamar Manasa's Judaism. That, I mean, it's just like they're parts of her religion informs who she is.
Absolutely.
Without exploring that, the film, okay, it would be a really interesting film about an incredible person, but it would be incomplete.
Yes. Yes. So you could have excluded that piece of her, but you made the film to include her religious self and her expression of it. What are some of the value adds that Tamar's expressions of faith added to the film? There are many moments that hinge on Jewish celebrations and such. So say more about that.
Yeah, so you're right. In the film, we have a couple of different Jewish celebrations. We have a Passover Seder, we have a Sukkot celebration. We see her reading from the Torah, and we see her in her temple. But to me, her Judaism, or her activism rather, is a function of her desire to fix the world. And there is a precept in Judaism called tikkun olam, which is to repair the world. And Tamar talks about this all the time, that most people see problems and she sees cracks that need repairing. So some cracks are bigger than others. And she'll always say, like, so you take out your spackle and you start spackling the cracks, and that's what you do. You fix the world, because we may not be able to completely fix it, but we have to try. We have to start. The idea is to leave the world a better place than it was when you got here. And she embodies that every day.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Tamar appears to be a real force of nature, as we've said, a natural leader. What was it like for you to work with her once you convinced her to allow you to make this film?
Yeah, if you couldn't tell already, I am a huge fan of hers. She's amazing. Working with her is one of the greatest privileges I've had personally and professionally. I mean, having her in my life and remaining in my life is a huge win for me personally. And to call her a friend and a close friend is something that I'm really proud of. So I didn't know how she would react to me when I first started working with her. So I was a little bit, hands off, and I tried to give her as much space as she wanted, which is, as I saw, that was my job. And the more she would talk, I would interview her. The first day when I got there to film, we just sat down and she talked at the camera for like 2.5 hours. And the first 3 days were like that. So I learned a lot about her in a very brief period of time. And I think she got comfortable with me very quickly. And once I went out there with her to the block and she saw me at work, I think she recognized that she could trust me, both as a filmmaker and as a person. And she started to confide more in me and to be more open. Not that she wasn't from the beginning, but I'll tell you, in the film, and I'm not giving anything away, one of the characters in the film gets arrested, Jermaine. When Jermaine got arrested, I was in New York, and Tamar called me at night to talk to me about it, because she was really upset. And this is probably 3 or 4 weeks into filming. And it was really then where I felt, okay, she is confiding in me and she trusts me. And we now have a level of trust exists between us, and comfort, that she feels like she can tell me anything pretty much. And I don't think I ever needed to say to her, I would never betray that trust. I think that that was intuitive, that we understand, like, okay, we're, looking out for one another in a strange way. And that is sort of how we continue to work. So I talk to her every day, probably.
Wow.
She has become part of my family. I've become part of her family. I mean, we have a real deep friendship, and it's real.
Sure. We have a principle at PEP that trust is essential, and in our work with healing kids, that development of trust is critical, and that really bubbled up in listening to Tamar talk about even some of the volunteers who were there with her. She seems like someone who, once she develops that trust and that relationship, it is for life. It is a deep and intimate connection.
Yeah,
So,
it's not easy to get there with her, but when you're there, you're there.
wow.
She doesn't let everybody in, but the people who she does let in, she lets in completely.
Wow. I'm curious about your role as director. Given Tamar's personality and the strength of her self, how much control could you exert in what seemed like a very fluid filming situation? And sometimes there was some tenseness, not because of Tamar, but just dynamics in the neighborhood.
Yeah. Yeah. And like I said earlier, my job is to document her world. I'm not coming in there to try to say, hey, maybe you should think about dealing with those people, or how about we do this today? No, that's not how I saw my role in terms of making this film. It was her world, and I'm an observer in her world. So really the rules of engagement were, at least from my perspective, and what I would tell the camera people, whatever she wants to do today is what we're doing. And we fell into a rhythm very quickly. We would get to Tamar's apartment at about 10:30 in the morning. We would film her whatever she was doing that early in the day as she got ready to go out onto the block. And then in the afternoon, we would drive to the block, and she would set up and do her thing on the block, and then she would go home. And that was, like I said, we're staying out of the way, and we are letting her do her job, because I didn't want to disrupt her world. And that was, again, when we started the film, when we started filmmaking, or when we started shooting, I didn't want to disrupt what she had going on, because she was really successful at what she does. And the last thing she would need is for somebody to come in and throw a monkey wrench into the works, because, he's trying to achieve something that, is not necessarily compatible with what she does every day. So for me, the primary thing still was, Tamar's got a job to do. Let her do her job. We're documenting her doing her job. And like you said, there were some moments where things got tense on that block. And again, our role, as I saw it, was to document that, not to get involved with it, not to try to influence it, but just to stand back and watch it as it happened. And that's what we did.
I imagine you had a hard time figuring out what to keep and what to cut out to keep this to kind of a film length that was reasonable.
Yeah. There were a lot of great things that didn't make the film, obviously. And those are choices that you make in every film that you make. And sometimes the choices are harder than others. We probably, I think the bloopers that we have from this would be hysterical. The relationship that Tamar has with Kendra is comedic gold. And we have a bit of it in the film. We have a nice amount of it, but there's so much more that we couldn't put in there for one reason or another. And just, there are things that are really funny, and then there are things that are just, they just didn't work in terms of the narrative that we were crafting. So it was not always easy. It was not always fun to decide to leave things out. But at the end, we felt that we made the tightest, best movie that we could, given what we have.
Yeah. You know, late in the film, Tamara and her mother take a road trip.
Yeah.
And I want to leave some mystery about it for folks who haven't seen the film. But as I was watching, I was wondering if you were on site and how you felt witnessing such emotional moments. What were some hard choices made in that editing process related to that trip?
Yeah. So I went on that trip with Tamar and her mom to the Carolinas. It was deeply emotional for everybody there. And I brought Dan Coleman, the cameraman, with me because I didn't want to hire a local person who didn't know what was going on. It was just so much easier to bring Dan, who had already filmed so much with us. And also, he achieved that level of comfort with Tamar and her mom that, you know, like I said, this is a really personal trip for them. They were going to search for their roots. And you know, every emotion you can imagine they felt. There was sadness, there was joy, there was a lot of anger. So when we talk about things that we left out, there's a scene where Tamar and her mom are at the Capitol in South Carolina and they're looking at some Confederate war monuments. We cut out about like 7 minutes of an extended rant about that. It was, and, you know, Tamar would go on Facebook Live and just, she was so raw and angry when she saw these monuments, and you know, justifiably so. Like her anger was everybody's anger who was with her on that trip. And as we watched it, we said, it's great, it's powerful, but it's too much. It takes us, you know, because the trip is the only time that we're out of Chicago. It took us out of Chicago for too long. And it almost felt like if we had left it, it would have felt like it didn't really, wasn't part of the same film. At least that was the decision that we made editorially. But it was really difficult not to keep all of that because, you know, everybody's angry when they see that, and everybody should get angry. And I want everyone to watch Tamar getting angry so they understand the depths of anger over this issue, because it's a pretty clear-cut issue that somehow doesn't, you know, people think like, oh no, they're reasonable people on both sides of it. I don't think so. I don't think so. There are reasonable people on one side of it, that's for sure. But you know, we couldn't leave all of that in. And there was another really difficult thing that happened to us while we were there. We went for breakfast one morning, and we went into, I don't even remember, I'm not going to name names of chains down in the South, but we went into, it was like a diner. And they saw us, two white dudes, an older black woman and a young black woman walking into this diner. And one of the white guys has a video camera, and they were like, you can't bring that camera in here. And we said, we're not using it. We're not filming anything. We just don't want to leave a very expensive camera out in the car because you just don't do that. Okay. And they put us off into a separate section of the diner. And the manager sort of had eyes on us the entire time. And the waitress came up to us, and the waitress was a young black woman. And she sort of looked around and she kind of confided in us. She's like, you have no idea how bad it is to work here. And we couldn't film it, obviously, because we were told not to turn on the camera. So we had a discussion about it when we got back into the car that we filmed. And even though that was really powerful, it just we couldn't work it into the film because we didn't actually film it happening. So that was easier to decide not to put in. But again, that's one of those things where it's like, wow, if we had only been allowed to roll the camera in that restaurant, we could have had something really interesting. So this woman was telling us that there are patrons of the restaurant who will not allow her to serve them.
Mm.
So they
Wow.
ask to be seated in other sections of the restaurant, so they will be served by a white waitress.
Wow.
And you think, like, is this really happening? Like today? We're not talking about 50 or 70 years ago. We're talking about today.
Mm-hmm.
And it's astounding.
Wow.
It was really something.
I appreciated Tamar's words earlier in the film where she alludes to the structural and systemic factors that contribute to the gun violence that Chicago experiences. And I thought that, this trip helped to give that some context, and what you're describing now gives that context that those systemic issues have their roots.
Yeah.
And sadly, those roots are in some of our southern states.
And they're everywhere, not just in the South.
You're right. You are right. Um, it occurred to me that the routines of how we all live life have been really blown up by this pandemic. I'm curious, how has the life of this film been affected?
Yeah, that's a painful question. So the film premiered at the end of January at the New York Jewish Film Festival. And we had been poised for a festival run. And we had scheduled some special screenings around different parts of the country. We had been accepted to different festivals, and everything sort of dried up. So I'm truly grateful to the Cleveland International Film Festival that they decided to stream the festival this year, because now people do get to see the film and other films that are probably going through the same issues that this film is. So we're still waiting to hear from other festivals in terms of what they want to do. I've been contacted by a couple of other places that want to have virtual screenings, which I'm fine with. I'm more than happy to do. And I think what I'm hoping that this will do is compress the time frame to get a distribution deal for the film, so people can get it on, wherever it's going to live eventually, video on demand or whatever network, who knows. But hopefully that will happen sooner rather than later.
Yes. Well, you can count on us to celebrate and elevate this film as other opportunities to view it become available.
Appreciate that. I really appreciate that.
What do you think the film has to say about our current times?
You talked a few minutes ago about systemic racism and just underlying issues. What we're seeing right now in places like the South Side of Chicago is that the situation for people there is much worse. So I'm talking about with the coronavirus, with COVID-19, with illness. So if you're already underserved by the healthcare system, and you already have underlying economic problems, job insecurity, poor schools, all of these things are now made 100 times worse because of this. It's not an accident that in St. Louis, the only people who died from the virus are Black people. It's not an accident that there's an inordinate percentage of Black people in Chicago who have the virus. And, as I would hope that as a society, we would use this opportunity to look in the mirror and say, these are issues that we need to fix. I don't know that we're going to fix them. I feel like the rot is almost too deep in the society to fix it. And people, it's not a secret what the solution is. It's not like nobody knows what the solution is. People know what the solutions are, but the powers that be don't have the will to change things. And that is a tragedy. I mean, there are so many tragedies. We have 50,000 dead people in America today from this virus.
Yeah.
And we have 20 some odd million people out of work. if we can't use this opportunity to change things, then nothing will ever change. And when we think about who have been deemed the essential workers in society today, there are lowest paid workers. I'm not talking about the hospital workers, the doctors and the nurses, and God bless them. I'm talking about the people who are working in restaurants, fast food restaurants. They're still working. I'm talking about people who are out there making deliveries, people who are in their jobs and who don't have the luxury of working from home, and who are putting their lives at risk. And for what? For minimum wage and lower paying jobs. They're not getting extra money to do this. They're doing this because if they don't, they're going to lose their health insurance, they're going to lose money, and their families will starve. So instead of saying, these are essential workers, okay, if they're really essential, we need to pay them more, and we need to guarantee that they all have health insurance. I would love to see that happen. That's an easy thing to do. Do we have the will to make it happen?
Right. We've been looking closely as an organization at some of these systemic factors and how they impact the lives of children and the delivery of educational services and behavioral health services, and learning the history. So much of how these conditions have been created are not known to the average American, and
right.
there's much knowledge to gain and much work to do, but I agree that there are definitely solutions that if we had the will, we might see those enacted and better support all of Americans' needs, but most certainly the most vulnerable Americans.
Amen.
Well, on a lighter note, I'm curious how you've been spending your time. What are you binging, whether that's food or films or song, music?
So that's it. How have I been spending my time? So I don't have any projects right now that I can be working on because I can't go anywhere to film anything. And so things have slowed down on that front, which has given me more free time than I would like. So in terms of binging, I've been listening to a lot of podcasts because I at some point I have to tear myself away from the news because it's just too depressing over and over again. I try to get out of my apartment twice a day. So in New York, we have parks close by that when I walk in the morning and then later in the afternoon, just to give myself, move my body a little bit and to give my brain a little bit of a rest from what's happening. In terms of like things that I'm watching, I just finished watching on HBO, The Plot Against America, based on the Philip Roth book, which was okay. It was pretty good. Definitely frightening given the climate that we're living in now. There's not a lot of sports going on either. So I've been watching a lot of Yankees classics on the Yankees network. So these are, all-time Yankees games that they've chosen throughout the years. And the great part of this is the Yankees never lose on Yankees Classic. So at least for 5 minutes, I can remember what it was like when I was excited about a big win. And that's kind of what I'm doing. I have 3 kids, and I'm involved with their lives. And of course, we're all a lot more together now than we had thought we would be, which is a blessing and a curse. But I like to think of it more as a blessing.
Yeah.
So I get to spend time with my kids, even if they don't want me to necessarily, but that's what we do.
It's surreal to be at home with our family members and our kids in the ways that we are right now. And sometimes you have to be intentional in remembering that there's a blessing in this. There's absolutely.
Yeah. And I say, my oldest is a sophomore in college. And so he's home. And people say, oh, you must be really happy to have him with you. And yeah, I am. I love having him here, but it also breaks my heart that he's here.
Yeah. You mentioned podcasts. I'm curious, what are a few of your favorites?
Okay. So I do my own podcast, so that's my favorite.
You want to plug that?
Yeah, I'm going to plug that right now. I do a podcast with a good buddy of mine named Stephen Cook. It's called the Amen Corner,
Okay.
and we've
That
been
title.
doing it. We've we've been doing it for this is our fourth season, and it just started out as we would always have these back and forth text things that we would just riff on things, and we said, oh, we should do this as a podcast, or we should. And we joked around about it for a while, and then we got serious and said, like, oh yeah, we can do this. And we've been doing it for a while. The last few episodes, we have been intentionally not discussing anything related to Corona.
Mm-hmm.
And we gotten some feedback from some of our listeners saying, this was a good diversion.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one of the things. In terms of other people's podcasts, I had been listening to The Daily, which is the New York Times daily podcast, but I had to distance myself from it because it was just too painful.
Mm-hmm.
So I have been listening to something called The Rewatchables, which
Oh.
is Bill Simmons, who is a journalist and media personality. He and a couple of other people talk about movies that they've watched over and over and over and over again. And he's like my age, so we have a lot of the same points of reference, and it's really pop culture heavy. So it just feels very familiar to me, and I've seen all of the movies that he's seen. So that to me is a good diversion.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I'm going to add a couple of those to my list. I'm going to skip The Daily. I've been there with you where I had to let The Daily go. It's too much.
And it's so well done that I can't.
During difficult times, it can weigh on you.
Yeah.
What are you most looking forward to doing once things get back to normal?
What am I most looking forward to doing? I'm just looking forward to living. I mean, I want to go back out to Chicago and go to the block.
Yeah.
I want to be able to work out in the gym and not in front of my video camera. Because I do this Israeli martial arts called Krav Maga.
Yes.
And I've been doing it for a couple of years. And I would do it, every morning. And now they have online classes and it's great and I love it, but it's not the same. And I need to get out there, and I'm looking forward to hitting the mat again.
Yes. Yes, I can imagine.
Yeah. What about you?
Oh, well, I am looking forward to, gosh, I think hugs. Hugs are what I'm missing the most right now. And I don't know when we'll be able to do that again, but I'm someone, I hug my friends. I hug my mom, who's not here with us in our household right now. And I hug my son's teacher and principal. I miss seeing those staff at their school. I miss my colleagues. There's just so much to miss, but I don't know. I hope I can at least get a firm handshake, handhold kind of deal.
I would hug before I would shake somebody's hand.
You're probably right. That's probably true. So I'm looking out at this sunny day, and I just, hope that we can all at least enjoy a beautiful spring and summer. And that might have to be enough for right now.
I think that might be right.
All right, one last question for you. It comes from one of my favorite podcasts, Code Switch. Oftentimes they'll ask an interviewee, what music is giving them life right now? Is there any song or soundtrack that you can point us to that, because the soundtrack in the film was amazing, let me say, and I'm imagining those were many Chicago artists. I know Chicago is a hub.
Yeah, I want to give a plug to the performer who did the music. Her name is Intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
And she's incredible. I was introduced to her by a Facebook friend who had posted something about Chicago hip hop artists with social consciences. And I reached out to him and I said, yeah, I'm looking for that sound for my film. And he said, oh, I saw this woman named Intelligence who opened up for Wu-Tang in Washington, D.C., and she's really interesting. Nice. So so I reached out to her, and she was amazing, and I think her music is great. The we use a track that she had already done called "I'm a Movement." We use that for the closing credits, and it's almost as if she wrote it for Tamar, but it had been written already. So what am I listening to right now? You know what? I listen to music all the time, and the last couple of weeks, I really haven't been listening to a lot of music.
All right, well, we can look up intelligence for sure
Yeah,
and
intelligence
stream
with a
her.
Z at the end. She's awesome. You know, I think at times like this, you sort of fall back on like comfort things, so whether it's food or films or music. So I'm a big Bruce Springsteen fan, and have been for a long time. And there's never a moment where Bruce's music isn't of comfort. So
And relevant.
yeah, and relevant. So I listen to Bruce. Um, I listen to a lot of things. My kids, you know, before my kids sort of got old enough, I hadn't listened to popular music in years. But as my kids got into it, then I started getting into it. And then the more time I spent on the block, the more I started exploring some current artists. I like Migos a lot.
Yeah, that's fun music.
And they really are. And they have another album that's supposed to drop soon. I don't know if it's going to be as good as, you know, I feel like they've almost played themselves out. Like, how much more can you take what they're doing? Or how much further can you take what they're doing?
Right.
But I enjoy listening to them. And it's sort of just like lets me sort of get out of my own headspace, which is good.
Well, thank you, Brad. This has been a pleasure. The film is amazing. We
Thank
will
you.
keep our eyes and ears out for any other streaming and viewing opportunities. And I look forward to what you bring to us next.
I appreciate that.
This time will pass, and there will be new stories to tell
Yeah.
about other human beings. And it looks like that's been your life's work.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And thank you. I really enjoyed this today.
Thank you so much. Take care.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye.